Hello, and welcome to the Casual Dex. I'm your host Dex, and today's video is part 4 of the Dex Tech series, where Dex does techs on the decks that you want to play today. These decks are typically aimed at a casual power level to provide a good starting point for your average game of Commander. Granted, not every table or matchup is going to be equal, but I try to build them in a way that they can be easily adjusted to better fit your personal meta. I do hope you enjoy today's video and consider subscribing or turning on the notifications to be alerted when new videos like this are posted. It really helps out my channel and helps me learn what kind of content you enjoy viewing. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into the video. Today's episode of Dex Techs is a very special one for me, as we'll be covering the first commander I ever built, Grismold the Dreadsower. This 3/3 troll shaman from, well, no one actually knows. I mean, have you ever tried looking into the lore for Grismold? I certainly have, and let me tell you what I found. Grismold the Dreadsower is a legendary troll shaman from an unknown plane. Deep in the forest of his plane, Grismold has formed a symbiotic relationship with the strange carnivorous plants that live among the primordial trees. They feast on the corpses he brings back for them, and he feasts on their nectar, an unusually rich, invigorating source of nutrients. Not to complain, but the only thing they tell us here is no one really knows where Grismold came from, and plant his life. Our moldy boy here is a 3/3 for 3, being one generic and Golgari colors that can really throw a punch. This troll has Trample, and two fun little abilities. Reading at the beginning of your end step, each player creates a 1/1 green plant creature token. And the second ability, reading whenever a creature token dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Grismold the Dreadsower. The game plan of this deck is to spread out as many tokens as we can and find ways to kill them off in the masses to get a crazily overbuffed commander, or just outvalue the opponents by maximizing the use of Enter the Battlefield and death triggers, all while giving us other forms of an advantage throughout the game, or if we don't get enough ways to kill the tokens, we just go incredibly wide and swing a ton of them at the opponent's face. As per usual, I will start with the lands and mana cards first to get them out of the way, but after that is when things will start getting interesting. Be sure to keep an eye out for the highlighted cards throughout the video, because we will be revisiting them again at the end. Totaling 36 lands, we have 11 of each basics within the Golgari colors: Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, Forbidden Orchard, and Opal Palace. These tap for anything excluding Exotic Orchard, with its specification is it taps for any color a land an opponent controls, but green and black are not uncommon colors within the format of Commander, so I'm sure you'll see at least one of the colors you need from another player in the game. Forbidden Orchard does also give an opponent a 1/1 spirit creature token when it's used, but that's alright, we want to have plenty of tokens in play with this deck anyway, so it's not that much of a disadvantage. Opal Palace is interesting because for 1 and tapping it, we generate 1 color within our commander's color identity, and if it's spent to cast our commander, it enters with a 1/1 counter on it for every time we've cast it this game. So if people have removed Grismold a couple of times and we've recast it for 2, 3, 4 times, it will enter the battlefield with that many +1/+1 counters on it as a result of us using Opal Palace to cast our commander. Bojuka Bog, Field of the Dead, Karn's Bastion, and Mosswort Bridge are fun to have because Bojuka Bog is going to burn out a player's graveyard when it enters the battlefield. Field of the Dead is fun, where if we control 7 or more lands with different names, each land entering the battlefield under our control will also create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Karn's Bastion is a great generic mana source, but for 4 mana we can proliferate, which means we choose any number of permanents and/or players, then give each another counter of each kind already there. While Mosswort Bridge enters tapped, and taps for a green, it enters with Hideaway, meaning we look at the top 4 cards of our library and exile 1 face down. We then put the rest to the bottom of our library. For 1 green and tapping Mosswort Bridge, we may play that exiled card without paying its mana cost as long as creatures we control's power totals 10 power or greater. Rogue's Passage is also a fun land that gives a generic, but for 4 mana we can also activate its ability to make target creature unblockable, which is always going to come in handy. Llanowar Wastes, Overgrown Tomb, Twilight Mire, and Woodland Cemetery are also great includes that provide different access to either of the colors we're going to need in this deck, while Shizo Death's Storehouse taps for a black, or for the cost of a black and tapping it, we can give target legendary creature fear until end of turn, which means that creature can no longer be blocked except by artifact creatures and/or black creatures. Some of the other mana options that are not lands that we've included in the deck are Elves of Deep Shadow, Elvish Mystic, Llanowar Elves, Sol Ring, and Wildgrowth. Pretty much just mana dorks and a little bit more mana. We're going to want to keep ourselves and our stuff safe, so with cards like Alpha Authority, Fair Umbra, Canopy Cover, Heroic Intervention, and Lightning Greaves, we should be able to keep some of our more important creatures into the battlefield. We can also just remove some of the problems our opponents may have played with cards like Golgari Charm, Corrosive Grip, Nature's Claim, Return to Nature, or Beast Within can just destroy any permanent we want while leaving the target's controller with a 3/3 Beast creature token that we're just going to feed to Grismold later on. We don't have many ways to bring creatures back for battle that our opponents may have managed to remove, but we do have Fungal Rebirth, Nim Deathmantle, and Victimize. These give us a way to bring a creature or two back from the graveyard, while Fungal Rebirth also creates 2 1/1 green Saproling tokens for us as a bonus if a creature died this turn, and Victimize has us sacrifice 2 other creatures, which will typically be tokens to trigger Grismold, and we'll get to return 2 creatures from the graveyard back into play tapped. Unrelated to Recursion, I also did include a few other cheeky cards, them being Champion of Lambolt, Ram Through, and Tainted Strike. These were just too hard to pass up for me in this deck, with Champion of Lambolt getting a +1/+1 counter whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, and also has an additional ability that reads creatures with power less than Champion of Lambolt's power can't block creatures we control. Ram Through can easily take a player out of the game if used right, but keep in mind, even though our commander has trample and will likely spill some damage over into the opponent's face when we use this card, this does not count as commander damage due to the commander damage requiring actual combat damage to occur. While Tainted Strike is honestly just salt in the wounds, because the only thing more annoying than dying to commander damage is dying from an overbuffed trample shaman that now has infect. Now, with this deck we're going to be throwing around a ton of tokens, but we want to have several ways to kill them off if our opponents have agreed to not let them die. We can let them pool up these tokens a bit while they get comfortable with the idea that they have already clearly outsmarted our game plan here. But here's how we're going to start killing creatures off in bulk. Engineered Plague, Illness in the Ranks, Massacre Girl, and Virulent Plague all either give creature or tokens -1/-1 or -2/-2 counters, which should kill just about all of the tokens we're going to be generating for everyone. Time it right with Massacre Girl, because once she resolves, she will trigger an additional time, giving all other creatures an additional -1/-1 counter until end of turn every time a creature dies this turn. So if there are, say, 4 1/1 plant creature tokens in play, and this card is allowed to resolve, there will be a total of all creatures in play getting -5/-5 due to the 4 additional creature deaths that occurred that turn. The more tokens or creatures dying on this turn, the more -1/-1 counters are put up to hopefully wipe the board if we need to. Grim Affliction and Tragic Slip are 2 others that I included, where Grim Affliction puts a -1/-1 counter on target creature at instant speed and lets us proliferate at the same time. While Tragic Slip being one of the funniest 1 mana instants to give a creature a -1/-1, it also carries an additional Morbid ability that'll give the target creature -13/-13, with the only requirement being that a creature died this turn. With all these death triggers and tokens coming into play, we're going to want ways to really abuse our opponents by getting extra value through creating treasure tokens, pinging opponents, gaining life, or drawing cards off of tokens and creatures dying, so we've included Black Market, Pitiless Plunderer, and Revel of Riches. All of these add value to deaths in the form of either treasure tokens or charge counters, providing extra mana, or even an alternate wind condition with Revel and Riches having an additional ability where if at the beginning of our upkeep, if we control 10 or more treasure tokens, we win the game. While Black Market adds an additional number of black mana to our pool during our pre-combat main phase equal to the number of charge counters on Black Market. These counters are added to Black Market for every single creature that dies, which sees everyone's board, not just our own. Blood Artist, Sir Conrad the Grim, and Zulaport Cutthroat all like creatures dying or hitting the graveyard, with Blood Artist and Zulaport draining the opponents for 1 life and gaining us 1 for creature deaths, and Sir Conrad the Grim is an interesting legendary creature that deals 1 damage to each opponent whenever another creature dies, or a creature card enters the graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, and an added ability for 1 and a black to mill each player for 1. Continuing with our value on deaths, we want some card draw, so we've included Altar's Reap, Costly Plunderer, Moldavine Reclamation, and Skull Clamp, where we're going to mostly use these to kill off our tokens and draw some cards. Species Specialist allows us to name a creature type when it enters the battlefield, and whenever a creature of the chosen type dies, we get to draw a card. Liliana Dreadhorde General is Value Town on a Planeswalker, coming in with 6 loyalty counters, and a static ability that reads whenever a creature we control dies, we draw a card. But she also does come with some other fun stuff that we want for this deck, including her +1 ability, making us a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Her -4 forces each player to sacrifice 2 creatures, and her -9 can just destroy our opponent's plans by making each player choose a permanent they control of each type and sacrifice the rest. If we manage to get to that -9, we're going to want Grismold to be well oversized, because after we use that -9, we're going to want to start body slamming our opponents with the Troll Shaman to start removing opponents before anyone has a chance to recover from that -9 from Liliana. We're not always going to have a good opportunity to attack, or really don't want to wait to attack or block to be able to get some value out of our tokens. Let's continue the value with some of our Sac Outlets that we've included in the deck. This is going to include Ashnod's Altar, Carrion Feeder, Phyrexian Altar, Priest of Forgotten Gods, Spawning Pit, Viscera Seer, and Yahenni Undying Partition. All of these really come in handy to ensure we max out our deaths by adding more mana or just letting us make more tokens, while Yahenni is similar to our commander but also has haste instead of trample and only gets a +1/+1 counter when a creature our opponents control dies. But if we do sacrifice a creature to Yahenni, we can grant the Aetherborn Vampire indestructible until end of turn. Now, before we revisit the highlighted cards that you've probably seen throughout the video, let's get into some of the gravy of the deck. Grismold wants lots of tokens to turn into counters for our stuff, so we've included Animation Module, Blackbridge Troll, Druid's Call, Genesis Chamber, Grave Titan, and Hunted Troll, as well as Mykolov, Saproling Cluster, Second Harvest, Sylvan Offering, and Tendershoot Dryad. All of these enable us to really keep the tokens coming, and to really abuse the number of counters on our stuff, we have cards like Blade of the Blood Chief, Corpsejack Menace, Eternal Thirst, Hardened Scales, Hydra's Growth, and the Ozolith. Between all of the tokens we're going to be pumping out into the battlefield, and the disgusting number of counters we'll be raking in with this deck, these will all really blow things up to a truly disturbing level. As promised, I had mentioned to keep an eye out for the highlighted cards, as we would be revisiting them at the end of the video. Before we dive in, I would like to take a moment to thank you for watching this video and supporting my channel. If you have not already, please consider subscribing, liking the video, or even leaving a comment with some form of feedback for the build or even my style of content. It really helps the channel grow and shows me what kind of videos to continue making in the future. The highlighted cards that you've seen throughout the video are what I consider to be key cards or sneaky little combo pieces that lead to an insane number of triggers or loops in the deck. Grave Titan combined with Nim Deathmantle and Ashnod's Altar, we can sacrifice Grave Titan in one of his 2/2 black zombie creature tokens he creates to the altar, and if we apply the 4 mana we just got to Nim Deathmantle, we bring Grave Titan back onto the battlefield, which leads to infinite tokens and enter the battlefield triggers. If we happen to have Blood Artist or another one of our death or enter the battlefield pingers in play, we can also end up with this loop generating infinite 2/2 black zombie creature tokens, as well as infinite damage to our opponents. Phyrexian Altar also pairs well with Saproling Cluster and Moldervine Reclamation, where we can generate infinite draw, life gain, and enter the battlefield triggers, but with a mana cost of 5 on Moldervine Reclamation alone, it does make this loop a little steep on the mana resources, as well as not being truly infinite, as the loop is limited to the number of cards we have in our library. This loop is performed by sacrificing a creature to the altar, drawing a card off of Moldervine's trigger from the death, as well as gaining a life, then using the mana produced to activate Saproling Cluster and discard a card. This allows us to dig through the deck, and if we use Ashnod's Altar instead of Phyrexian Altar, we can net a generic mana for each loop performed this way to use elsewhere if we need to. Animation Module loops with both Ashnod's Altar as well as Phyrexian Altar by Animation Module using one of the mana produced by an altar to make a new 1/1 colorless servo creature token that can also be sacrificed, providing an additional mana to endlessly repeat the process. With Animation Module and Phyrexian Altar being only 2 mana to play, all we need is a creature to sacrifice, and if we happen to have our commander in play, we can sacrifice a token to the altar, feed the mana to Animation Module to create a new token that's ready to sacrifice, and start stacking this loop into 1/1 counters on Grismold endlessly, leaving our opponents likely sounding something very similar to this.
Damn, he's sick!
There we have it, the 4th episode of Dex Techs, where Dex does techs on the decks that you want to play today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you've made it this far, please consider subscribing or even sharing the video with a friend. I appreciate it a lot, and it helps the channel grow a lot more than you'd think. Leave your ideas for commanders that you want me to cover next, and I'll take a swing at building the one with the most likes on it. I'm your host Dex, it's been great, and I'll see you next time.